Hi everybody! I'm so excited to start reading this story to you today. This is a really fun one. It is Disney's Peter Pan, and it's super fun because it's a pop-up book. So you can see how the pictures pop out of the page. Let's get reading. The Darling family lived in London in a big house. There were 6 of them, Mr. and Mrs. Darling, and their children, Wendy, Michael, and John. Finally, there was the children's nursemaid, Nana. Nana also happened to be a dog. But she took wonderful care of the children, especially when their parents went out for the evening. On one such night, Mr. and Mrs. Darling were planning to go to the theater. That same night, Peter Pan decided to visit the house, and it wasn't the first time either. While getting dressed, Mr. Darling was upset because he could not get his tie just right. He shouted at his children and Nana, who hadn't done anything wrong. Mrs. Darling could not calm him down, even when Mr. Darling decided to tie Nana outside for the night. This night, he was even more upset because his children, while playing Peter Pan and Captain Hook, had drawn a treasure map on his shirt. Luckily, Mrs. Darling had been able to get out the marks. After Mr. and Mrs. Darling left for the theater, Peter Pan slipped into the window of the nursery. Peter had visited a few times before, and on his last visit, he had gotten separated from his shadow. Nana had it and wouldn't give it back to him. Wendy was thrilled when she woke up and found Peter leaping across the room, chasing after his shadow. Tinkerbell, the little pixie that followed him wherever he went, was there too. Wendy told Peter that she would be moving into her own room tomorrow. "I have to grow up," she told him. "Come with me to Neverland," said Peter. "You'll never grow up there." Wendy woke up Michael and John. "How do we get there?" they asked. Peter sprinkled pixie dust from Tinkerbell onto them. "All you gotta do is fly," he said. Ooh. They flew all night long to Neverland, an island complete with a pirate cove, a village, and a lagoon where mermaids lived. They could see Captain Hook's big ship anchored in the bay. Captain Hook had 2 enemies, Peter Pan and a hungry crocodile. One day, while fighting Peter Pan, the captain had his hand cut off. The crocodile had grabbed the hand and swallowed it. Ever since then, the crocodile had followed the captain, hoping to get another taste. Later, Captain Hook fed the crocodile a clock. Then, at least, he could hear the crocodile sneaking up on him. As soon as Captain Hook saw Peter Pan flying over his ship, he took action. Peter and the children were resting on a cloud when a cannonball was shot from the ship. "Tink, take Wendy and the boys to the island," said Peter Pan. "I must have a few words with my old friend, Captain Hook." Tinkerbell was jealous of Wendy, so she flew the children to where the Lost Boys lived. Peter was their leader, and they were waiting for him to return from London. Tink told the Lost Boys that she was being followed by a Wendy bird, and that Peter had given them orders to get rid of it. The boys went right into action to capture the Wendy bird, just like their leader had ordered. As the Lost Boys fired their slingshots at Wendy and her brothers, Peter appeared just in time. "Is this how you welcome my friends?" said Peter to the boys. "I was bringing you a mother to tell you stories." After the boys had explained what had happened, Peter Pan told Tinkerbell how disappointed he was with her. Peter then introduced the children to the Lost Boys, who were very glad to have Wendy as a mother. Then, to help Wendy forget what had happened, Peter offered to take her on a visit to the Mermaid's Lagoon, while John led the Lost Boys and Michael in a game of following the leader. When Peter Pan and Wendy had reached the Mermaid's Lagoon, they heard a strange noise. "What is it?" asked Wendy. "Pirates," Peter whispered as they rushed behind a cliff. "It's Hook. He's captured the Princess Tiger Lily. We've got to save her," Peter decided. "Watch this, Wendy." Peter Pan jumped in the air and landed on Hook's boat. Watch this. Ready? Ooh. Comes in and out. When the pirate saw him, he pulled out his sword. During the fierce fight, Captain Hook heard the tick-tock of the crocodile's clock moving toward him. "Help!" shouted the pirate as he lost his balance and almost fell into the crocodile's mouth. While Hook was fighting for his life, Peter swam to Tiger Lily and saved her just in time. After returning to her village, Peter Pan and Wendy joined John, Michael, and the Lost Boys, singing as he led them through the forest. Little did they know that Captain Hook had a new plan to destroy Peter Pan. He would use Tinkerbell to trap his enemy. When Hook's first mate, Mr. Smee, had found Tinkerbell alone, he took off his cap and trapped her inside it. Then he took Tink to Captain Hook's ship. Knowing that Tinkerbell was jealous of Wendy, Hook lied to her, saying, "We have to save Peter Pan from all the trouble that Wendy is causing him," he said. "We will capture Wendy and keep her until Peter understands that she is to blame." This seemed to make sense to Tink, so she pointed out Peter Pan's hideout on a map. "Thank you, my dear. You've been most helpful," said Hook. Meanwhile, the Lost Boys listened as Wendy told wonderful stories and sang to them about mothers. They suddenly felt sad and wanted to go back home. "You can go if you want," Peter told him, "but I warn you, if you go back, you'll grow up and you'll never be able to return to Neverland." The Lost Boys decided to leave anyway, but Peter chose to stay behind. As soon as Wendy was outside, she and all of the boys were captured by the pirates. None of them knew what would happen once they reached the pirate ship. After they had gone, Peter saw a package left behind. There was a note on the gift which read, "To Peter Pan, with love from Wendy." Tinkerbell had overheard the pirates planning to leave a bomb for Peter Pan. Feeling sorry, she escaped and flew to save him. Tinkerbell had gotten to Peter just in time. "Tink, you mean more to me than anyone in the world," he told her. She told Peter that Captain Hook had kidnapped Wendy and the boys. The children would walk the plank unless Peter Pan saved them. Peter jumped up. "Let's go, Tink," he said. On the pirate ship, Hook told the children that they would have to stay and become pirates or walk the plank. "We prefer to die," Wendy told him. "Besides, Peter Pan will save us one way or another." Wendy jumped from the plank, but there was no splash. None of the pirates knew that Peter was hiding beside the ship, and when Wendy had jumped, he had caught her in midair. "This time I'll get you, Pan!" cried Hook, waving his sword. He jumped at Peter, but the boy was quicker and smarter. Peter Pan was so quick, he confused Captain Hook, and the pirate started to lose his balance. Hook looked down into the water to see a terrible sight. The crocodile had been watching the fight, hoping to get another taste of the pirate. Just then, Captain Hook slipped and fell down, down, down. This time, there was a splash. "Hooray for Peter Pan!" shouted the boys on deck. They watched as Mr. Smee and the pirates hurried away in a small boat. Captain Hook was swimming furiously behind, following closely by the hungry crocodile. "We're casting off!" shouted Peter. "Where are we going?" asked Wendy. Peter smiled. "I'm taking you back to London." "Go ahead, Tink," he ordered. As the children cheered, Tinkerbell sprinkled pixie dust all over the ship. Suddenly, the ship grew as light as a feather and was carried up by the wind. It floated high above the island, then turned and sailed toward home. When Mr. and Mrs. Darling returned home, they found their 3 children asleep in the strangest of places. Wendy was on the window sill, Michael was at the foot of the bed, and John was on the door holding his top hat close to his chest. As their parents tried to put them back in their beds, the children awoke and began to excitedly tell of their wonderful adventures in Neverland. "Peter took us there," Wendy said. "We met the Lost Boys, and we were taken prisoner by pirates, but Peter saved us," he explained. "I guess we'll have to wait a while before you're grown up," Mr. Darling said. "It seems we need Nana in the nursery after all," she said. Suddenly they looked out the window and could see a shadow of a big ship move across the moon. "Look, that's Peter's ship. He's going back to Neverland," said John. And as Mr. Darling watched, he had the feeling that he had seen the ship before, but it was a long time ago, when he was very young. Thank you for listening, boys and girls.